Ken Manning, Western Wisconsin Video Productions here in the Westby Syttende Mai. We're in the basement of New Directions, and we thank those fine folks for giving us the facility. And we want to thank Karen Rebholz here. And Karen, thanks for coming in all the way from Madison. And you are going to have two presentations for us today. What's presentation number one all about?
Yeah, in presentation number one, I'm going to be talking about Hardhanger fiddles. First of all, why they're important to Norwegian tradition and their cultural, historic context. And then I also build the instrument. So I'm going to be talking about how you actually go about building a Hardhanger fiddle. As you see, there's line drawing on them and inlay. And while they're the size of a violin, they're very different from a violin. And so I'm going to be talking about those differences and how you build them, and then talking about some of the fiddles I've built. So that's the first presentation.
So when you say build, you're right from scratch, and you from whatever piece of wood?
Right, chunks of wood, and the top is made of spruce, like split down the middle and joined at the center, and it kind of looks like firewood when you first get it, but it ends up carved like this, and yeah, so chunks of wood is what I start with.
Wow. Well, and if you look at this, the designs, I mean, this is just exquisite. I mean, it really is. I can't think of a more beautiful Hardhanger. Is that how you say it? Hardhanger. I got to remember that.
Yeah.
So how in the world do you get all these pieces put togetgether?
Yeah, well, that's what the talk is going to be about, part of it. But
we're not going to steal that.
Yeah. So often the designs are unique, so I design it first, and then I have to make a fingerboard out of ebony, and I cut shell and silver and bone to the shapes of my design and inlay them into the ebony. I also design the rosing, which is the black line drawing on the instrument, and draw that on with a black pen. But yeah, there's a lot involved in different techniques involved in creating one.
When you do this, and here on the end, I mean, this, folks, I don't know if you can see this, but it's an actual face on here. And how do you carve that, or how's that work?
Yeah, so like I said, I start with chunks of wood. So I make the designs and carve them all myself. It's traditional on a Hardhanger fiddle to have a lion or a woman's head, and this woman happens to be my friend Carolyn Benferrato, wearing her bunad from Voss. So the recent fiddles I've been building have been inspired by people and their traditional clothing from Norway. So anyone that knows what the clothing from Voss looks like will recognize this design, because this is the traditional headpiece. And so yeah, and that's the way I go about it.
That is just so neat with things. Now, folks were saying that, in fact, Dave and Ruth, we want to say thanks to them on the History Alive project, bringing you in today. But these are somewhere between like what, $8,000 plus?
Yeah, I think probably the cheapest you can hope to find an instrument for is about $3,000 if it's like the cheapest playable instrument. But if you're talking about custom-built instruments, then they're about $6,000 and up. You can take some shortcuts and produce them a bit less expensive than that. Buying an instrument out of Norway, a new one, is about that price, up to $10,000 or $12,000, and some of the best older instruments are more than that. So.
My goodness. Now, presentation number two, we're going to actually play some music and show folks how things work that way.
Yeah, Dave and Ruth have asked me to play a little bit in both presentations, so I'll do that. Just a few tunes at the end of each. But the second presentation is called April in Voss, and it's about a trip I took to Voss, Norway, to work with the fiddle builders there at Ole Bull Academy. And I was taken in under their wing, and I stayed with the 71-year-old head fiddle maker in his home in the valley in Norway. And it's about the things I learned from him and the adventures he took me on, and how the Hardhanger fiddle is part of their local tradition and just is alive there in what they do every day and every week. And some of the other stuff that goes on around that fiddle building tradition. So it's a bit of a travel talk, but it all relates back to the music and the dance of the Hardhanger fiddle.
Well, we're really looking forward to this. My grandson is going to be taping so that everybody around here can watch this a handful of times, if not more. And Karen, thank you so much for being here. My goodness, I think people are going to be in for a treat on both sessions.
Well, thanks. It was a pleasure to be invited here for the first time. I haven't been to Syttende Mai in Westby before, so.
Well, be careful. They'll keep bringing it back.
Good. Thanks.
Well, all right. Well, we're going to take a break. Thanks to Karen Rebholz, who is here today with her presentations. We'll have a couple of those, and we'll get started on that in just a moment. Take a look at our wonderful...
Started 7 years ago as a result of us wanting to have a different way to look at history in our area. And by different, I mean also a different audience. We're not just about dead people and dates. We like to talk a little, everybody's on history. Most people will say that. We wanted to make our story of our area and the people that made our history of this area alive. And we wanted to make this, it wasn't a society or a club. All of those connotate committees, you know, I mean, bars and coffee, there's nothing wrong with that. And so we named our project, our organization, History Alive Project, because it's always a project in the making. We have no real members. When we have a project that our board cooks up or is giving suggestions to, what we will do is look at that, find the people that are willing helpers. We've all been on committees where we have, yeah, I suppose next year I can help you. And, right, I saw some nods. And we found that we could get our projects done that people suggested because they had vested interest in it. Then someone suggested, when someone donated a little money to this group, well, we better start a 501c3. A chemistry teacher retired from high school, and me, a science teacher from up at Westby. How do you start a nonprofit with the government? You know, Google, and pretty soon we knew what to do and filled out the papers, met the requirements. Now, so any of you can donate generously. We've learned a lot. So without further ado, we're going to be having a cultural speaker this afternoon. Comes from Madison. Her name is Karen, either Rebholz or Rebholz.
Rebholz.
Reb. Think of the portion in the Civil War, and they were Rebs. We have always wanted to, at History Alive, to take Syttende Mai beyond hub fries and a tractor pull and play darts. I don't diss any of those, but I'm saying that it's got to get bumped up because of Norway's rich food, music, literature, folklore, trolls, everything about it. We would like people to go away with that next layer, or even that next layer of heritage. And I can think of nothing better than a Hardhanger fiddler to come and talk to us. Well, how do you find a Hardhanger fiddler? How do you do that? Google it up. You were on a list of speakers, and I think you had contact with Dana, who was here previously, talking about some genealogy.
No.
She says, I have a record.
There is.
Ruth was Westby.
Oh, duh! Called them and presto. We had never met Karen before today, but we dialogued on the phone. I can't tell you how happy we were to find somebody. And number two, when she even said yes, I was more happy. And it's been a delight to share the idea of her coming. So, and here comes another person. Are you just here to put in the rest of the drywall, or what? No, I'm kidding you. Come on and sit down. We'd love to have you. So, let's put our hands together to welcome Karen today. We're going to miss the train, but that's too bad.
I forgot to bring my clock, and I could talk a long time, so I want to make sure I don't talk too long about Hardhanger fiddles. But let's see. Let me know if you can't hear me, and then I'll see if there's a microphone. So I'm doing two talks today. The first one is about the Hardhanger fiddle and how it's used in Norwegian culture and a little bit about the history, and then how to build them, because I build Hardhanger fiddles. And people are usually interested in how you produce something that looks like this. And then at the end I'll talk a little bit about a few instruments I've made and play some of the music. And in the second talk, I was lucky to go to Norway and spend a month at the only place in the world where they will teach you to build Hardhanger fiddles, and at Olebull Academy in Voss, Norway. And they were very kind to me there. I lived with the head fiddle maker, who's 71 years old, and just became a part of the culture for that month and learned a lot about how these instruments fit into their life and what their life is like. So I'm going to talk about where he lives and how he works, and our trip to the cabin in the mountains in the snow where we got stuck in the snow and stuff like that. So it's a bit of a travel adventure talk in the second talk, but also related to what I learned about building fiddles from him. So I'll start at the beginning. So I'm going to start with the music. This is a picture from Grandvin in Norway. It's an international master class, and the two men on the right are the teachers, and the other three of us are students. And the music is the most important part of this. It's a tradition of music that has been passed from fiddler to fiddler by ear without written transcriptions for hundreds of years, from at least the 1600s. And so this is what I was doing in Norway, was learning by ear from these fiddlers with a student from Japan and two of us from the United States. There were supposed to be other students, but we lost a few along the way, but it was just the five of us. So here's this is Life Ray. He was an important tradition bearer of music, had a lot of tunes in his head that he taught people, and he performs, and this is him playing at master class. So you get to hear the music first. lot from him. He came to teach in Wisconsin and was a very important teacher at Rebholz Academy in Voss, Norway. He died within a year after that video, unfortunately. It was a great loss. But so this is a Hardhanger fiddle. It's so you may say, what makes a Hardhanger fiddle different from a violin, or what's special about it? I really think of it as kind of a holdover from the Baroque, or a holdover from the 1600s. It has a lot in common with early violins. It's about the same size, but there are differences. So one of the things people notice first, well, maybe is the decoration. So it's traditional to have inlay on the fingerboard, and then black line drawing on so the fingerboard is there, and black line drawing on the body of the instrument. And the strings are gut, like strings were back in the 1600s or 1700s. Black line drawing on the body. The other thing people notice are the number of pegs. And a violin has 4 pegs because you're playing on 4 strings. But a Hardhanger fiddle has 8, 9, sometimes 10, sometimes 6. But a Hardhanger fiddle always has 4 strings that you play like a violin, but it has additional strings that run from the pegs in the peg box, underneath the fingerboard, through the bridge, and connect here. And you never play those directly, but they're tuned so that when you play a note on the top, it'll make the strings on the bottom start to vibrate. They're called sympathetic strings, and when they start to vibrate, they make sound. So it adds a great richness and resonance to the music that you don't hear on a regular violin. And the bridge, which is, this part is flatter than a violin, so you're usually playing on 2 strings at once. That's part of the traditional sound. And these are called F-holes, and on a Hardhanger fiddle, the wood is carved so that it's overlapping, and on a violin, they're in the same plane, so they look very different. Here's a picture comparing a Hardhanger fiddle to a violin. So you can see some of those things that I described, that they're about the same size. The length of the vibrating length of the strings on a Hardhanger fiddle is shorter. So the instrument overall is usually longer than a violin, but it's because the peg box is so much longer. And the strings themselves on a violin, the vibrating length is longer than on a Hardhanger fiddle. So if you're used to playing a violin, you have to move your fingers a little bit closer in to play the Hardhanger fiddle. This is a very sketchy map of Norway, and the Hardhanger fiddle is traditional to Norway and has persisted in Norway for hundreds of years. But it wasn't historically played all over Norway. It was played here. Sorry about that. It was played here in the southwestern region of Norway, whereas the more northerly parts of Norway played regular violin, and then there were some areas in which people played both the Hardhanger fiddle and the violin. And I mentioned that Hardhanger fiddles have a long history. This is my friend Toby Weinberg, who found this fiddle in North Dakota. A family had it in their closet. And he's comparing it to the oldest known Hardhanger fiddle in Norway, which is the Josta fiddle from 1621, and it's in the museum in Bergen, Norway, and actually 1651. And the date in Toby's fiddle is 1622. And so he set up an appointment with the curators, and they were examining the instruments, to try and see whether the one he found in North Dakota was actually older than the oldest instrument they have in Norway. And I don't think they have any conclusions about that yet, but it's pretty clear that there were older, that there were Hardhanger fiddles before 1651. And the evidence for that is that there are cases left. And this is a case that's the perfect size for a Hardhanger fiddle, and the date on the case is 1512. So there are many reasons Hardhanger fiddles didn't survive, one of them being that they're wood, but also that the church considered the music of the Hardhanger fiddle devil's music, and so there was a push to destroy them over the years. So as they fell out of use or were destroyed, we lost a lot of historic instruments. And this is a picture from the Met Museum in New York City. It's kind of hard to see, but these are other early instruments that were used in Europe at the same time that early Hardhanger fiddle was being used. And these instruments all have sympathetic strings, just like the Hardhanger fiddle. And in Europe, nearly all of these instruments have died out, the instruments that use sympathetic strings. But in Norway, the people kept playing Hardhanger fiddles and building them with sympathetic strings, and just persisted for hundreds of years when the other ones died out. The only one that's being used in classical music today sometimes is the viola d'amore. And then Hardhanger fiddles usually have a woman's head or a lion's head on the scroll, and people wonder, where did that come from? At the top, like a violin usually has a spiral shape, but these have lions and women's heads. And this is an instrument that was built in the 1600s in Germany, and this also has a lion's head, and it also has inlay on the fingerboard, but like with sympathetic strings, the fashion for this changed, and they made more plain instruments, whereas the Hardhanger fiddle continued having more decoration. Here's another picture of inlaid fingerboards and lions on the scroll that are historic instruments in Europe but died out over time. So in Norwegian tradition, there are important cultural uses for the Hardhanger fiddle. So they were used for weddings, like you see here. This is actually a traditional Norwegian wedding that happened in Baronet County in Wisconsin. This is Phil Oden's son. Phil Oden and his wife Elsa Bigton are wood carvers. They trained in Norway and they made their living in Wisconsin carving wood, and they also have fjord horses. And when their son got married, they had a traditional Norwegian wedding. And in the traditional Norwegian wedding, there are tunes to play on the Hardhanger fiddle while the bride is getting ready, and then tunes to play as you process to the church. So this was the procession to the church. And my friend Toby, who you saw with the old fiddle in an earlier slide, is here. He was the fiddler for this wedding, and the bride and groom are here following behind. So the fiddler would lead the bridal party and the guests to the church, and when they arrived, the fiddler had to wait outside, because remember I told you it was the music of the devil, and so they weren't allowed inside. But after the wedding ceremony was over, the party went on for a long time, and the fiddler played for dancing, and there were tunes, a lot of tunes for dancing, and then there were even tunes to play the next morning as the sun was coming up, when people were tired and hungry and you fed them the first meal of the day. So there's a rich tradition of tunes that have been passed on. I mentioned that Hardhanger fiddles are played for dancing. This is a video of a traditional dance unique to Valdres in Norway. so what I mean by that is instead of going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, in the Valger Springer it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And it's not like 1, 2, 3. You can't divide the measure evenly. It's a really unique rhythm to this valley in Norway, and a unique dance that goes with it. And this video was from a national folk music festival called Landskapelig. And this group of people are from Valdres and get together to dance and perform at the national festival, Landskapelig. And they have competitions and parties. And so it's not just a stage dance, it's also something people do at other times just for entertainment. So I started playing Hardhanger fiddle in 2008, and I started trying to build the instruments in 2012 because I had been doing a lot of wood carving, and I had a background in art, and I like designing things, and I'd done some metal work, which is a lot like cutting shell for inlay, and I'd done the carving, and I had a background in science too, and trying to figure out the acoustics of the instrument was really intriguing to me. So building these instruments was a way to combine my interest in the playing of the music, the art things I like to do, my interest in Norwegian heritage, and science. So there are no plans. You can't go out and buy a set of plans or a kit to build the instrument. So I wrote to some of my friends I knew that played and said, knowing that different makers build the instruments differently, slightly different sizes and shapes, I asked, who should I try and copy? And they told me, they gave me a lot of different names, but I decided to copy a Helen instrument, and I had measurements from a book, and I had a picture from the Digital Museum in Norway. So I'll give a shout out to the Digital Museum. It's online. Norway has cataloged nearly everything in their museums. There are numerous museums throughout the country. And you can go onto their website and call up those images and the measurements and any data they have about all the objects in their collection. So it's super useful. So I called up this image of a Olaf G. Helen fiddle and used the measurements from a book I had to come up with a plan, and started making templates and drawings. And on the right here are arching templates to help me figure out how to carve the curves on the instrument. And people, when I say I build these things, people don't really understand what I start with. So I tell them I start with chunks of wood, and sometimes they look like firewood. But here are some starting pieces for what I use to build the instruments. The back is made from, I've been using different kinds of maple, the different grains of maple, either curly or bird's eye or quilted maple. This is a curly maple board. This is the top, which is made of spruce. The back of the instrument, the maple is harder and stiffer and reflects the sound, whereas you want the top to be light and flexible to help transfer the waves from the vibrating strings. And so the top is lighter weight and more flexible. And it's cut from a log, like straight down the grain. You want a straight grain wood, and then the two pieces are joined at the thick part of where it's at the outside of the tree. And so that's why these pieces, there are two pieces there that are joined together. This is plum and ebony, which I use for pegs. So in Norway, they used wood they had around them, and so that meant they were using birch a lot for the back of their instruments, and they used fruit wood for the pegs. They didn't have any ebony in Norway in the early days. Ebony which is used on modern violins for fingerboards and pegs, wasn't in Norway. So they use fruit wood for their pegs, and that's why I use plum sometimes. It has some properties that give it advantages over ebony. The other thing is the inlay comes from shells and bone, and I had shells from the lake I grew up on as a child, and so I started cutting up clam shells to do my inlay. But you can also buy shell from suppliers, and it's really nice and flat, and the same thickness, which makes it easier to do the inlay, easier than working with shells from the neighborhood lake. And then this is bone here that's used. So to start building, I made a mold, which is this center part, based on the drawings I did for the shape of the instrument, and built the instrument up around that. So the mold isn't a part of the instrument, it's just a form. And then I put on corner blocks, which are here, and those blocks remain as part of the instrument. That's the first thing that's done. And then the sides of the instrument are made from maple. And maple, it's thin to 1.2 millimeters using, I have some power tools, but I also use hand planes to thin it down. And then it has to be bent into this curve. And that's done with a bending iron and with steam. So this is a bending iron. This aluminum part heats up, and then I have a thin piece of wood that's flat to begin with, and I hold it against the hot iron because the iron's hot. I have to hold it with a metal strap like this, and then I put a piece of cloth next between the wood and the metal of the bending iron, and it's wet, and the cloth releases steam, which allows me to bend the wood to the proper shape. And when it cools, it will keep that shape. So I need to be very careful about bending the wood to the right shape to make the sides. And then those bent pieces of wood are glued onto the corner blocks that I showed you before. So here are corner blocks. And so the bent pieces of wood are glued just to those corners. And then here I've moved on one step to put on linings, which you'll see better in one of my other slides. But the linings are thin pieces of wood that, I told you the sides were 1.2 millimeters thick, which is like that little. So if you have to glue a top onto a piece of wood that's really thin, it's not very stable. And so violin makers put linings in their instruments, which are veneers of other thin pieces of wood. And that's why there are all these paper clips, or not paper clips, clothespins, that are holding the lining on as I'm gluing it in. So here you can, sorry. There. You can see where the linings are on this piece of wood. So once these slides are showing removing that mold from the ribs so that I get the ribs free. I break the glue joints between those corner blocks and the mold, and then there's enough flex in the ribs that I can slide the mold out. And so you see how that goes. So making a Hardhanger fiddle or any violin is about making a lot of parts, and this is how I make the first part. And then this is making the top of the instrument. Here are those two pieces of spruce that I described how you have these firewood-like shapes, and you, like triangles, and then you they're book-matched and you put them thick side to thick side and plane them flat and glue them together in the middle here, and that's how you start building the top. And then I take the ribs from the last slide and trace them onto this, and saw out the shape of the top. And the next step is to carve the exterior curve of the top. So that's what I was doing here. Violins, people don't always realize, have a piece of laminated wood along the edge that's called purfling. And that's just very thin strips of wood that are inlaid into the top wood. And you can see those thin strips of purfling here in this image. And then this tool, I set the pencil at a specific distance from the tack on the bottom. And if I run it around the piece of wood that I'm carving, it draws a line where the thickness of the wood is the distance between the pencil and the thumbtack. And so then I can see whether by drawing those curves, or drawing on the top of the wood as I'm carving, I can see whether I'm carving evenly. Because the goal is to get even curves. So once the exterior contour is carved, I carve out the inside of it. And people don't realize, but the thickness of the wood for the top and bottom of a violin or a Hardhanger fiddle is not the same all the way across. It's actually thicker in the middle here. It's around 4.5 millimeters thick, whereas at this section on the top and this on the bottom is thinner, like around 2.2 millimeters thick. So to make it easier for me to carve out the inside and get to those thicknesses that resemble that, I use my drill press. And I set the bit on the drill press to stop for the center 4.8 millimeters from the leather pad here. And I drill a bunch of holes. So I know that the drill has stopped 4.8 millimeters from the outside. Then I switch where it stops to do the other areas. So I may set it to 2.5 for this area and draw out a bunch of holes. So then once I have drilled out the holes, then I take the wood away down to the point where the drill stopped. And that process looks kind of like this, where this one, you can see the holes are still, you can still see the circles from the holes, but eventually you get to a smooth inside using chisels and little tiny planes with curved bottoms, and this is a thickness caliper, so I can, it will measure for me how thick the instrument is wherever I place it on the instrument. And for the top of a violin and a Hardhanger fiddle, the next step is to put in the bass bar. So there's an additional piece of wood that strengthens the side of the instrument where the lower strings are, and that's fit carefully and glued in, and then carved to shape. My second talk is going to talk more about, I went to Norway to learn how to make the instrument sound really great, and the way you can carve this to a specific contour, but every piece of wood is different and every instrument is different, and the way you can get the best sound is by tapping the wood as you carve and carving the shape in response to what you hear. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in my second talk, because that's one of the things I learned in Voss. So then this part needs to be made, the neck. So I start with my chunk of wood again and have a design that I've come up with, and start to carve it with small chisels, and just keep going. And so this is just showing the process of continuing to carve the neck, and eventually the fingerboard, which is here, gets attached to the neck so that you can make them both the same size. You carve them together so then they're exactly matched. And this shows cutting the angle at this end of the neck so that when you finish, this is the hardest part of building the instrument for me is setting the neck and making sure that angle is correct. And one way to help make sure it's correct is to start at the right angle. But this is angled back so that the strings angle up so that they clear the fingerboard. So that jig is used to, I use to cut that angle. And as for making the fingerboard, these are actually pictures from making this one. I draw, first I have to make the fingerboard out of ebony because if you're building a violin, you can buy a violin fingerboard that's perfect for a violin, like the right curve and the right length, but nobody makes fingerboard blanks for Hardhanger fiddles. They're all made by the instrument makers themselves out of ebony logs. And so I make that ebony piece first, and then I inlay it with shell and bone. And I do a design, a very detailed design. I make copies of my design, glue it to the bone and shell I'm going to cut out. I also tape that design onto the ebony and cut away the blue tape. I cover the whole thing with blue tape because it makes it easier for me to see. And I pull away the pieces of tape that in the spots where I'm going to put shell and bone, and then use this router with a very tiny bit to take away the wood where the bone and the shell are going to go. And to cut the bone and the shell, this is my setup. I cut it with a jeweler saw, which is, those saws can be used to cut metal too if you're making jewelry, but they work really good on shell and bone. And one thing you don't want to do is breathe in the dust from shell because there are a lot of pollutants in it or heavy metals, and also the structure of the shell can hurt your lungs. So I have this Ulpa vacuum, which is more, it's used for lead remediation. It's like more, cleans the air better than a HEPA filter, for example. And so while I'm cutting, I have that vacuum on and the dust is all exhausted into there. So I've talked to you about building a number of the parts. Now I can start putting them together. Here I've glued the ribs to the back of the instrument, and the top is sitting on the side. And there's gluing the top on, although the top is facing down. It's glued together to make the sound box. And one important thing is the glue that is used in most of instrument building is a hide glue. So it's kind of like industrial strength Jello. And the reason that hide glue is used is because it's reversible. And it's a glue that people had in the past, but the most important thing is that it's reversible. So if you need to repair a violin or any other kind of stringed instrument, a guitar, you can use steam and heat to break the glue joint without breaking the wood. So hide glue is used. So here's cutting that. So once the sound box is glued together, you need to cut into it to accept this end of the neck. And this is the hardest thing for me in building the instrument, is to get all those angles right, because they need to match exactly so that the neck is in the right position, so the strings are in the right position, and it can't be crooked, like just a fraction of a millimeter off, and your neck is crooked and it doesn't line up right. So it takes time to do this. And then, once the neck is put on, there's finishing of the instrument. And you don't go down to your hardware store and just buy the can of varnish. Instrument makers have specific kinds of varnish they use. They tend to be in two camps, either an oil varnish that cures with UV light, or a spirit-based varnish, which is like shellac, in which you have an alcohol that evaporates, and that's how you get the finish. But in addition to those top coats, there are many other steps along the way. So I use finishes that I buy from a company called Oldwood out of Spain, and they try and reproduce the finish that was on like a Stradivarius violin from Italy from the 1600s. And the finishing starts using a gelatin coat. So this is actually Jello. In the US we usually have it in powder form, but in other places they have it in sheet form. So I mix that with water and put that on first. And I told you there's spruce on top and maple on the rest, and the spruce is soft and the maple is hard, and they take finish differently, but putting the gelatin coat on helps to even it out. And then there are things, when people talk about secrets of Stradivarius, they don't know what Stradivarius put on the violins, but they talk about minerals, and there are a couple different mineral coats that this company makes that include things like amber to add depth and shine to the instrument and make the finish more beautiful. And I often use this color to tint my varnish, which is a cochineal. It's a historic red color that comes from little insects that grow on cactuses. And I read a book once about the history of red, which was really exciting for me to read. And I never knew that a lot of transatlantic traffic, the boats that went between the New World and the Old World in the 1700s, for example, were full of the little cochineal bugs, because they grew in South America and they were used for dyeing cloth in Europe, and they were highly valued, and so tons and tons of these insects were shipped back and forth across the Atlantic. But they're still used in oil colors for instrument coloring. And then, so I do use oil finishes usually, and I told you the oil finish cures in UV light. And sometimes I'm finishing, so the best UV light, or what people did historically to cure their finish, was to hang their violin in the sunlight. But in Wisconsin, when I'm building, I can't hang my violin out in the middle of winter. And I hang it in the window, and it gets a little UV during the day. But at night, I put it in this trash can. And you see the glowing trash can. The trash can, I went to the pet shop, and they sell reptile lights, because reptiles need UV light also. And the reptile lights are the same wavelength that I need for curing the oil finish. And so I have 3 reptile lights in there, and the galvanized surface of the trash can reflects the light waves. And so I just hang my fiddle in the middle of it, put the cover on, and by the morning, the finish is cured. Whereas if I left it on my workbench, it would be still sticky the next morning. And after that, some of the finished layers are started. I do the drawing, I make designs, and then transfer it to the fiddle and use black ink to do the drawing. A few pieces I haven't talked about yet are the pegs. And here I show some of the steps in making pegs. I have a tiny little lathe that this is plum wood, and I can turn it into the shape of a peg, and then put here, this is the plum with bone over the top, and it's painted black to look like ebony, because that's what the Norwegians did. The bone, those circles on the pegs, they confuse the evil spirits. So they're traditional on Hardhanger fiddles. And to make the circles, I made a tool that I put into my drill press to just spin the thing to make those circles. Here's the thing that's in my drill press. It's got a couple little spikes on it and a center spike. So that's the center spike, and then you spin it in the drill press and it makes the circles. Oh, and then these are traditional pegs, but with so many strings to tune, it's really hard to tune the sympathetic strings using traditional pegs, and I've started using peg heads, which this is advertising from peg heads. I can take traditional looking grips, so the end part, and connect up to them fine-tuning shafts. So for every full turn on the grip, it's a quarter turn on the shaft. And it makes it's like a modern way to make it so much easier to play a Hardhanger fiddle. And the pegs are not straight cylinders. They have a taper to them. So these are peg shavers, and they have, they're tapered, so it's like a pencil sharpener. You put your pegs in to give them that taper you need. And then these reamers, which you put into your peg box, have the same angle on them. So you can see they're kind of a triangle shape, and those are used to fit the pegs. And the last piece that I think I'm going to talk about is making the bridge. So the part that holds up the strings, it's an important part made out of special maple. If you're building violins, you can buy them already cut, but Hardhanger fiddles, no one makes them. And everyone is unique to each fiddle, so the person making the fiddle or repairing it has to build their own. Here you can see those understrings going through the bridge, and then the 4 top strings. To set up the instrument, I use tools like this. This is something to hold the bridge and make sure you get the angle on the feet so that they exactly match the angle at the top of the instrument. Another thing I didn't talk about is this dowel of wood. It's called a sound post, and it fits on the treble side of the instrument between the top and the back, and it helps to stabilize the instrument and transfer the vibration waves to produce sound. So if you've heard the term sound post before, that's what that is. And then tools like this are used to set the sound post in place. And these are skinny little files that I use to cut grooves in the piece that holds up the strings here, the nut. And these are feeler gauges, which some car mechanics use, but in instrument building they're used to set the height of strings where you want it to be. So here's one of my instruments. I'm running a bit low on time, so I'm going to go through it quickly. But I mentioned the Digital Museum before out of Norway. I like to be inspired by historic Norwegian things like bunads, the traditional clothing, but I also look at a lot of engraving. So here's an example of something I found in the Digital Museum. And it's a buckle engraved in Norway. And I took like this section here and did this drawing on my Hardhanger fiddle. Or I took something like this and did this here. So it's really useful, or I love being inspired by things that have come before and then using that as inspiration to do something unique in my own. Here's a purse clasp from the Digital Museum, and I abstracted it to make this on the back. So this is my friend Carolyn Benferrado. I'm sure she's at Stoughton in Syttende Mai today, modeling that bunad. and she lives not far from me, and we do Norwegian things together. And she inspired this fiddle here, her bunad, which is a traditional clothing from Voss in Norway. So there she is wearing her Voss bunad. And they have a traditional hairpiece that's just like a big kerchief. And she came over one day, and in my living room I took pictures of her. And she made this scout, it's called, herself. And I used Carolyn and her scout as inspiration for the design on the fiddle. So you can see Carolyn. And this pattern on the ribs comes from this around the neck, and the pattern here was abstracted to make the pattern on the fingerboard and tailpiece. And then the drawing on the top and bottom of the fiddle use elements from that I've abstracted. This is my friend Rebecca. Her mom, Laura Lee, lives in Mount Horeb, Wisconsin, probably also at Syttende Mai in Stoughton today. And her daughter Rebecca was my first Hardhanger fiddle teacher. I told you that tunes are learned by ear from fiddler to fiddler, and the Hardhanger Fiddle Association of America has a workshop every July in Wisconsin at Folklore Village. And that's where I started to learn to play Hardhanger fiddle, and Rebecca was there teaching. And Rebecca is married a Norwegian and lives in Norway. And this is her in her bunad, probably also on Syttende Mai. The bunads are like, we like to describe them as like team sweatshirts. So if you're wearing Bucky Badger, you know it's a Wisconsin thing. If you're wearing blue and gold, you know it's probably Iowa. Whereas someone who sees this will know, oh, Hallingdal, because the shape of the clothes and the embroidery is specific to that region of Norway. So Rebecca lives in Hallingdal, that's her bunad. And this is a picture out of the Digital Museum of another person in a Hallingdal bunad with a traditional hairpiece. So Rebecca doesn't have the traditional hairpiece, but this woman and these two little girls are wearing a cap with a pom-pom on top and one out the back. And so I used this as inspiration for another fiddle I'm building. So from that embroidery, I abstracted to make the fingerboard. Here you can see a little bit how I design. I like design double size so I can get the details. And then I shrink it down to the exact size. And so this is exact size, and then use that as a template for cutting. And here's that traditional hairstyle and how it ended up on the neck of the fiddle. So here's another fiddle I've done. She's Gertrude. This is Gertrude. She was at the Hardhanger Fiddle camp. Her mom was teaching. Gertrude was 11, and her mom came from Telemark in Norway. We have a banquet on Saturday as part of camp, and everyone dresses in their Norwegian finery. And Gertrude put up her hair in this traditional Telemark hairstyle. And Gertrude's beautiful, and I took pictures of her and then carved her on the end of another fiddle that I made. And then this fiddle had the fiddle with Gertrude on it was inspired by my neighbor's roses and this table in the Art Institute in Chicago. And because I had a friend who plays fiddle that saw me doing a lot of geometric designs, and she said, "Can't you do flowers?" And so I decided I'd do flowers for my friend. So this is a rose design. And I put the poem, "Gather ye rosebuds while you may," on the edge of the instrument. It's a poem that talks about how time is fleeting. And in art history, it's called a Vanitas Theme. And you can show this, you can create images to show that life is fleeting by contrasting a young girl with a pile of burning leaves, or or some pictures would have, or if you've seen beautiful still lifes with fruit and flowers, often there'll be a piece of fruit that's rotting in the corner. And it's there, I mean, you wouldn't expect it there in a beautiful picture, but it's there to remind you that life is fleeting and make the good use of your time. So that's what this fiddle is about. And now, I'm getting to the end of my talk, and so wanted to play some music for you, or was asked to play some music. So,
Do makers see put an initial embedded somewhere in the design? Or is that too egotistical for Norwegian? That's pompous, we shouldn't do that, right?
most fiddles have labels on the inside, and some makers do put their initials in the rosing, the drawing. And I use a symbol that I put in the rosing, and then I hide my initials under the fingerboard in the rosing. But yeah, if you know what you're looking for, it's pretty common to find the marks from the original maker on the instrument. It's pretty rare not to have them.
You referenced that community, the person who died, his last name was Helen. That's a four-generational company, isn't it? The music company, early in your talk, you talked about people in Wisconsin who came. Helen,
right.
Yeah.
So the man who died was Leif Rigg, and he has Wisconsin relatives, but he lived in Voss.
Okay.
But he came here quite a bit. But I also mentioned the Helens, and they're like this is a Steinchendalen, so Helen family instrument. They're kind of like the Stradivariuses of the Hardhanger fiddle world, and for 4 generations,
Yes, that's right.
they. Yeah, I talked about that in a talk I did for Vesterheim. I talked about the fiddles that they have in their collection, and they have representatives from fiddles from all the generations of this Helen family in their collection. So it was fun to see those and talk about those. But the Wisconsin connection with the Helens is that 2 brothers immigrated to Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin in the early 1900s and started building really great Hardhanger fiddles in Wisconsin. And one brother died about 1920, but the second brother continued to build Hardhanger fiddles until about 1937, when no one wanted them anymore. They had fallen out of fashion. And he continued making violins, but he didn't build any more Hardhanger fiddles.
Wow. Do you make the mold too?
Yeah. Yep. I make everything.
Is that out of certain wood too?
I use Baltic birch, which is a plywood that is made from wood that doesn't have knots in it. So it's kind of really nice plywood. It's plywood with multiple layers of wood. It's really stable, and that's what I use to make my molds. So it doesn't warp or anything.
I don't know about you, but I think the word I said 400 times in my head was wow. It's just,
So do you want me to play too?
yes.
Okay. So I showed you a picture early on of the master class in Norway, and I can play a tune or 2 that I learned from that master class. And one of them tunes was called Rudel etter Magnus Dagestad. The Rudel is a dance done in Voss, and Magnus Dagestad is a guy. And I first encountered Magnus Dagestad when someone from Wisconsin brought me this fiddle. And he wanted to get some information about it. And there was a label inside that I was able to read, and then I found out that Magnus Dagestad made fiddles. And Magnus Dagestad is from Voss in Norway. And he also did a lot of furniture and carving, and was really important in the romantic revival of the Viking period imagery in the early 1900s in Norway, and had a carving school in Voss, and now there's a Magnus Dagestad museum. And so
How many fiddles have you made?
I made 7.
And how long does it take to make one?
About 400 hours per fiddle.
I thought my rules long was bad.
Yeah, they do take a long time. There are ways to build them a bit faster. Some people use CNC machines to do some of the carving. And while I was in Voss, Norway, working with the fiddle builders there, they had they were keeping traditional hand building methods alive, but they also had a CNC machine. But even using that CNC machine, they estimated it took 200 hours to build a fiddle instead of 4. So it's not a quick fix either. So they are gut strings, which are less stable than my modern violin strings, which means they go out of tune very easily, especially when the temperature and humidity changes, which it did today between my air-conditioned house and this place. So I have to tune. I tuned before the talk, but
Now, is that tuned like a regular violin is tuned?
that's a good question.
I had a record from Norway when I was learning violin, and I tried to play along with this Hardhanger fiddler, and I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong.
Yeah,
Is
so
it a different tuning?
yeah, so I talked early on about the holdover from the Baroque, and one of the pieces of that holdover story is that there are at least 28 different tunings for Hardhanger fiddles.
Well, yeah.
So the most common tuning is, different tunings, I mean the strings are tuned to different notes.
Right.
And when you switch and play a different song, you may tune your string to a different note. So scordatura tuning. The most common tuning for a Hardhanger fiddle is to have the top 3 strings up a whole note from a violin.
Okay.
So instead of an A, you have a B.
It'd be a B.
And the E string is an F sharp,
Sharp.
and the D string is an E. And then the bottom string is up 2 whole steps from. So instead of having a G, you have a B.
Oh, yeah.
So,
And there are no fine tuners at the, you don't have the little fine tuners, it's all tuned pegs?
yeah, these are, on this instrument, every peg is a fine tuning peg. So for a full turn here, it's only a quarter turn inside.
Okay.
So it does make it, and they're very stable, so it does make it easier to tune, but it takes, you still have to tune, like when temperature and humidity changes. So unfortunately, it's been here long enough that I need to tune. So before COVID, before times, I used to play with my friend Carlos and Laura Lee, my first fiddle teacher's mom, as a group called Ladies of the Fjord. And we liked to play in different tunings, and the way we did it was to bring different instruments all in the different tunings. So if we were playing in 3 different tunings, we each had 3 instruments. And when we switched tunings, instead of retuning the instrument, we would switch fiddles. And that's a way to make it work. That's about an hour.
Yeah.
Would you like to hear another tune, or should I stop and take more questions?
Another tune.
Another tune. All right. I'd hoped to play one in a different tuning so that you could hear how you can change the flavor of the music by changing the tuning. They've changed since I tuned them. So, that was the first one. That's the second one. This is a tune composed by Ivan Groven, and he was born in Telemark in Norway, and grew up playing both Hardhanger fiddle and classical violin. And he went to music conservatory in Oslo, and he was born around 1900, and back in the, I told you Hardhanger fiddles fell out of fashion around the 1930s, and the city folk in Oslo and at the conservatory saw Hardhanger fiddles as kind of an undesirable part of rural life, or like, it wasn't a respected tradition. It's very different than classical music playing. But he was one of the first people to bridge the classical and the folk traditions of playing. And he had a radio show on the national radio in Norway where he played Hardhanger fiddle music for the first time and brought in fiddlers from the countryside to play for a city audience. And it was very controversial, but it was it was very productive in that there are lots of recordings of early fiddlers because of his radio show. And then I told you that the music was passed by ear from fiddler to fiddler, but when it's passed that way, there's a chance it can die out if some fiddler isn't able to teach it to another fiddler. And so in the early 1900s, when fiddlers were afraid their music was going to die out, they started contacting classically trained musicians to write down the music. And Edvard Grieg sent someone to transcribe Hardhanger fiddle music from Telemark, and he used it as inspiration for some of his pieces that he wrote. Ivan Groven, who wrote this tune I'm going to play, also because he was classically trained, wrote these things down, and then led to 6 volumes that are like that thick of transcriptions of traditional tunes. Some that were lost to the ear tradition, but now are written down so that people can go back and listen to them. So the guy who wrote this tune was really important to preserving the tradition. And the tune is called Summer Morning, and his daughter named it because Ivan was composing it in the cabin in the summer in the mountains where they spent time in the summer, and she would hear him playing it outside her window as she was waking up.
a huge debt from us. We felt that you filled in a lot of questions and made it richer, made the whole thing richer for the weekend, right? Mangataka.
Yeah, so.
And you'll be back at 2:30, is that correct?
Yeah, if you want to
Two.
hear more about
Two.
Voss and travel adventures, and the Hardhanger Fiddle music as part of the local culture, that's what I'll be talking about, and how to make them sound.
Isn't it ironic, the lace from Hardhanger lace?
How did the
No?
name Hardhanger come up?
Yeah, well, from the region. In Norwegian, it's Hardhanger, and there is a rich tradition of playing these instruments in Hardanger, Norway, but it's also in other areas in the southwest. So not just the Hardanger region.
Are there any that make it like
Not many, because like given how long they take to make, it's hard to make a living at it. But and as I keep
Shouldn't give you
repeating,
this earlier, right?
it died. Actually, I brought some. The music died out, and people lost interest in it. But now, beginning in the 70s, there was a real revival and interest in the folk traditions, both in Norway and in the U.S. And the Hardanger Fiddle Association of America, for example, was formed in 1983 by members of the Valdres Samband in Minnesota because they wanted to hear Hardanger fiddle music and there was no one left playing it anymore. And so from that, there are now quite a few people playing. They've continued to grow both in Norway and in the U.S., the number of people that play. And the number of people building, too, has started to grow. So in the U.S., there's me, there's Ron Post in Black Earth, Wisconsin, who doesn't build as much anymore, but he started building in the 1980s when no one in the U.S. was building. And there's Bevan Wolfenstein in Provo, Utah, and Lindbergh in Eugene, Oregon, and David Goldberg in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So that's it for the main builders in the U.S. There might be people who have built one or two. And in Norway, there are maybe 6 builders. But they're keeping the tradition alive at Olaville Academy. And there's one builder in Japan who trained in Norway with a builder there. There's a lot of, I mentioned at the International Master Class, there was a woman from Japan. There are clubs in Japan where people practice Norwegian traditions, including playing Hardanger fiddle. When I was in Norway at the Hardanger Folk Museum, they were having a Hardanger embroidery class, and all but one of the participants were from Japan. So they will create bunads and dress in the bunads and celebrate, not their own cultural heritage, but like their interest in Norwegian heritage.
How is the Stradivarius different?
Yeah, that's,
1 hour?
yeah, so the Stradivarius violins are, violins, so they have the difference from a Hardanger fiddle, but they were built, so Stradivariuses today have been modified from their Baroque form. They used to have a bass bar that looked like a Hardanger fiddle, but now they have a bass bar that looks like a modern violin. So that piece of wood on the inside is now beefier so the Stradivarius originally had a smaller one. The Stradivarius originally had a shorter neck, but all the modern ones that are being played now, they cut the instrument here, and they cut it here, and they create a longer piece, and then tack this back on. So what I'm saying, and they do that, they make these changes so that they can fill a concert hall. The original Stradivarius instruments would have been quieter, and so those changes have been made. And I guess what I'm saying is that they were more similar to a Hardanger fiddle than modern violins are. But they have all the other differences that I discussed earlier in the talk.
I'm going to put awesome in there. Wow, and then I'm going to put a file for awesome.
Well, thanks, everyone.
Terrific. Thank you.